Got it. Okay.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey, can you hear me?
I can indeed, I think. Can you hear me?
Yes, I also think I can hear you.
Great. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, I was just, we were already live. There's somebody is already, 2 people are already watching us, so you can wave. But we're a bit, like I'm starting a bit, the stream a bit earlier, so don't worry.
I may actually have to just jump out and jump back in on my other laptop. Apologies. I just saw that I need to change system preferences.
Yeah, so we have some time. So.
Yeah. Okay, I'll be back in 2 minutes.
Yeah. See you soon. Now you have a different laptop.
Hello.
Hey.
Back again.
So different laptop or the same one?
Different laptop. Yeah, we don't use Zoom, and I forgot, of course, I don't have system preferences for screen sharing. So.
Okay. So you have a different laptop.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. Yeah, so we still have 2 minutes. So maybe I can ask you some random stuff. So where are you now?
Yeah, I'm in Berlin right now.
Berlin. And you're originally not from Berlin. Your last name doesn't sound very German.
I think my first name, neither.
Yes. Well, first names are trickier. Right?
Yeah, true. No, yeah, I'm from Ireland originally. Yes, just from outside Dublin in the Wicklow Mountains.
Okay. And yeah, so should I pronounce your name? What is the correct way of doing this?
It's Gráinne.
Gráinne, okay.
But I mean, I'm used to every sort of variation, so no stress.
Okay, and because I was not sure how to pronounce the A with accent. Is it like A or?
It's like awe, like
Is it Irish or?
Yeah, it's an Irish name. So it's funny because everyone in Ireland it's quite familiar to, so it's super straightforward for them to pronounce, but immediately anywhere outside Ireland it's much more difficult.
Yeah, I thought only French have accents on letters, but also for French I don't remember it. There is an accent for A. I remember that there are accents for E. There are 3 kinds of like you have accent this way, you have accent this way, and then you have a hat as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't remember about A.
Yeah.
I studied French like for half a year. Now I don't remember a single word.
I like to pretend I can speak French, when I'm tipsy, I'm like, je parle français. But in reality, no.
Okay. So what we will do now, I think it's time to start. So I'll just do a quick introduction about the community, and then yeah, it will take 1 minute, and then you can start.
Sure.
So hello, everyone. Welcome to our event. This event is brought to you by Data Talks Club, which is a community of people who love data. We have weekly events, and this event is one of such events. If you want to find out more about the events we have, there is a link in the description. Go there, click on this, and you'll see all the events we have planned. Then, of course, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, do it. Then you'll have all our videos in your feed. And then finally, join our amazing Slack community where we talk about different data-related things. During today's presentation, you can ask any question you want. There is a pinned link in the description. So click on this link, ask your question, and then we will be covering questions at the end of the presentation. So that's all. And now the floor is yours. Please start.
Great. Hi, nice to meet you all. So let me just make sure my slide is visible, correct? Great.
It is, yes.
So before I introduce myself, I'll just introduce a little the topic I want to talk to you about today. So algorithmic fairness, which I think is the term probably most of you have come across. I think it's not always clear what it means. How I define it is the field of research aimed at sort of understanding and correcting for biases in data. So your next question might be like, what are biases for data, or how can an algorithm be fair? I think what should be clear after this presentation is that fairness is still a subjective term, but as a sort of northern light, the definition here of fairness, I think, makes a lot of sense. So a given algorithm is said to be fair or to have fairness if its results and performance are independent of given variables, and particularly those considered sensitive or protected. So gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, etc. So to introduce myself, my name is Gráinne. I'm currently working at data science at spoke.ai in Berlin. My background, I'm from Ireland. My background is in mathematics and then statistics. And I originally worked in more traditional finance in Dublin. What feels like a very long time ago now, but not so long ago, moved to Berlin and worked in data science in N26 for almost 2 years. And there I worked on sort of NLP projects, geolocation, financial crime. And over the past 2 years, I worked in Adyen, which is another fintech in Amsterdam, also in data science. And there I also worked with financial crime, and also became interested very much in the topic of data ethics, which is particularly relevant to sort of financial crime applications. So before we dive in, I love quotes, and to warm everyone's brain up, I'm curious if you have guesses of who said this. So if AI has a goal and humanity just happens to be in the way, it will destroy humanity as a matter of course without even thinking about it. It's just like if we're building a road and an anthill just happens to be in the way, we don't hate ants, we're just building a road. So I will tell you at the end who said this, if you can guess without Googling. I think what I like about this is that it really emphasizes that, you know, AI is just given a goal and tries to achieve this. And it's up to us to decide what that goal is, at least for the moment. And so it is sort of our ethical responsibility to make sure that goal aligns with what we believe to be our own ethics. And that of course can differ from individual to individual and company to company. Okay, so I mentioned algorithmic fairness is the study of how bias appears in data and algorithms and how to fix it. So first, we're going to examine some of the ways bias can creep into data and algorithms. The first is in framing the problem. So whenever, usually when we're building a data product, we're trying to solve some problem. And how we frame that problem is actually very important. And I will talk about a concept called the alignment problem, which is specifically where this sort of misalignment can lead to bias. Another area that it can appear in is in collecting the data. So when you collect data to build your data product, you may run into problems if it's not representative of reality. So if a certain segment of the population, for example, is underrepresented. or if it reflects existing prejudices. Then it can also happen in the preparing the data stage. So this is when you're cleaning or subsampling the data. There can be some form of survivorship bias, which biases towards a particular protected attribute. It can also appear when you're selecting attributes or features to use in your model. And finally, in the broader sense of model selection, so how you're modeling your data product. Intuitively, we like to, I guess, or in the most instances, avoid results that correlate with some protected attribute when they shouldn't. And it's very difficult to do that with deep learning models. And unless a model is built on strong theories of underlying causal mechanisms, it can be difficult to identify and detect these biases. Of course, that doesn't mean you shouldn't use deep learning models. It's just a thing to be aware of with their use. So for each of these sort of ways, I'm going to go through an example, and then we'll talk a little bit about how you can mitigate bias when it occurs or identify it. So the first, I mentioned the alignment problem. I love this story. I heard it a long time ago on a podcast, and I tried to find this source. I didn't find the exact same story, but something similar. So it might have changed as it was being passed through different people's conversations. But here, a father was trying to teach his elder son to teach his younger son to use the potty. So he rewarded his son with a candy for every time he helped his younger son to go to the bathroom. Of course, what happened was he discovered the elder son was force feeding the younger son lots of liquids to sort of maximize the reward he got in terms of candy. So here, the problem was that the goal that the father wanted to achieve, he didn't specify, or he didn't set up the reward system in a smart enough way to avoid this sort of like indesirable outcome. And this is where bias can creep in. An example I saw recently enough was that a study of job postings, STEM job postings, saw that they were far more often targeted towards men than women. And the reason was not that men were more likely to engage with the advertisements, but actually, which I didn't know, men are cheaper to advertise to. And the algorithm they were using to sort of decide where to show these ads was optimizing for like highest click-through rate for lowest cost. So it was optimizing by showing it to more males than women. So it was achieving the goal of the algorithm, but then we have to ask, is this actually aligned with our goal? So that's the alignment problem. Data collection, there's another one I saw recently that I really like. So Google Translate, of course, we're all familiar with. One thing I think is useful to know or essential to know for this example, Hungarian has non-gendered pronouns. And you can see here, the text on the left is in Hungarian, and on the right is English. And so the algorithm behind this has to decide whether it translates this pronoun to he or she in English. And it uses the context of the words, the tokens beside it to make that decision. So you can see here, this has been translated as she is beautiful, he is clever, he reads, she washes the dishes, he builds, she sews, etc. So this is because the adjective clever has a higher probability of a male context and beautiful female, because this is, of course, trained on a history of text. So this is an instance of where the data set is reflecting existing biases. It is not incorrect, it is correct, but it is doing something that perhaps we mightn't necessarily want it to do. And it's just important to be aware of. A second sort of example that this often occurs in is in clinical trials. So this is more of a case where the data set is not reflective of reality. I think a recent study showed that in American clinical trials, although I think African Americans compose 16% of the population, they compose 5% of clinical trial participants. And so again, this is somewhere where model performance can suffer because your data set is not representative of reality. This is another example taken from The Economist of Google Open Images, and it's basically a labeled data set of images, and you can see basically for both men and women, but also for light skin and dark skin, the frequency of certain labels. So you can see, for example, more common in pictures of people with dark skin is the label prison guard, and less common and then more common in people with light skin is, for example, coach. I want to, because I mentioned quite a few of these large companies out there, like Google and Amazon, they have tried to fix some of these things. I know Google in particular had an open Kaggle sort of submission where you could submit pictures to help with these sort of problems and help remove the bias in these data sets. But they are there, and they will probably remain in a lot of these open source data sets for quite some time. So I also mentioned data preparation, and there's another one I really like. So Amazon as infamous hiring algorithm, so they want to save some time. I'm sure many of you know the pain of looking through loads of CVs, but they decided to train an NLP model to predict whether or not a given CV would result in a good hire. Because they used previous hiring decisions and they favored men over women, the algorithm actually explicitly learned to do the same. So they discovered that, for example, the algorithm would penalize the term women. So if you said, oh, played in the women's soccer team in high school, the model would penalize that. So the Amazon, and when the engineers discovered this, of course, they didn't want it to do this, and they programmed it to ignore these words, but they soon discovered the revised system was still picking up on sort of implicitly gendered words. So verbs that were more highly correlated with men over women, such as executed and captured. And I think what this demonstrates is also this model selection problem, because the model wasn't built on strong causal sort of reasoning. So what actually makes someone a good hire? What are those factors and how do we capture those? Instead, it was a deep learning approach that took, something like a CV and then sort of unsupervised, in a sense, trained it to sort of predict whether someone would be good at their job or not. And that can work in lots of domains, but when it's something sensitive like hiring, I think it is important to be really careful. The latest I know about this algorithm is that they use a much watered down version just to remove duplicate CVs. So they sort of shelved this whole thing. So that was a little bit of examples of how and where bias can occur. I think the next question, of course, is then, what can you do about it? And one thing I think is really fascinating about this field is how quickly it has grown over the past few years, and how I still think there is so much room for sort of technical advances, because to me, it is a technical problem, and therefore there should be technical solutions and tools to solve it. So it began, I think, there are a bunch of tools, just to give an illustration. So IBM released one in 2018, Fairness Flow from Facebook in 2018 as well. Google's What If tool, which is quite cool, in 2019. Microsoft had FairLearn in 2020, and SageMaker Clarify from AWS in 2020 as well. I think there's a lot more to come. And like, I think, for example, I've seen Spotify advertised for like research scientists in algorithmic fairness, and I've seen sort of many talks about this topic in different conferences. I think it's something that the industry as a whole is beginning to pay attention to. So I think it's really beginning to get the attention it deserves. So I'm excited to see what comes. But what kind of methods do these fairness tools employ? So the first are fairness metrics. And this is really metrics used to identify model performance for protected subgroups of the population. I'll show you an example of this in Google's What If tool. Of course, this first is useful for just identifying biases, but you can also use these to sort of adjust, for example, thresholds in binary classification problems to sort of maximize different sort of fairness criteria. Causal reasoning, already touched upon this. Basically, if you really want to, if you're working in a sensitive domain and you want to ensure that your model is making a prediction only based on factors that are within that person's control, it's difficult to do that without either explicit or implicit causal modeling. Counterfactuals. This is just this idea, of course, that a decision is fair towards an individual if it is the same in the actual world and a counterfactual world where the individual belonged to a different demographic group. So it's just a way of checking, would this also prediction be true in this counterfactual world? And then explainability. So, you know, of course, explainability is like a broader topic, and it's useful for driving model performance, for improving trust in our ML systems, but it also can be really useful to make sure that the model is making the right decisions for the right reasons. Okay, so these slides will be shared with you after, and I know there's a lot of information on these slides, so bear with me, but I do think it's quite interesting to go into a few of the fairness metrics. The first, demographic parity, is a more straightforward one. So just there should be an equal number of positive outcomes in the protected and unprotected groups. And just a note, this is all sort of assuming a binary classification problem, but it can be extended, of course, to anything related to regression or multi-classification. So the example here is if 80 females and 10 males apply for 10 open positions, if there's demographic parity, that means 8 males and 2 females should be offered a position. Okay, so what can be wrong with this? Of course, you can end up with different true positive rates and true false positive rates, assuming a certain proportion of qualified and unqualified candidates in each sort of protected subgroup. And you may consider that unfair. And then you come to equality of opportunity. So this is where the
sorry for interrupting.
Yeah.
I'm thinking if there is a mistake in the illustration or not. So it says if 80 females and 10 males apply for 10 positions, should be 8 females and 2 males, or
oh,
8?
Sorry, you're right. Yes, thank you. 80 males and 10 females.
Yeah, okay. I was thinking if, and perhaps 20 males, right? Like 80 females and 20 males, like then 100 in total. And then you have 10 open positions, so you can divide these two by 10, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Sorry. And and I have it correct in the next one. So yes. And equality of opportunity is where there's equal true positive rates in for both the protected and unprotected groups. So that means assuming you have a certain number of qualified candidates in each pool, the same proportion of qualified candidates should end up with a job offer from both pools. So if you assume in our example that there are 10 qualified females and 20 qualified males, with a true positive rate of a fifth, then of course, then 4 qualified males should be offered a position and 2 qualified females. This equality of opportunity does not ensure equal false positive rates. So if you, for the remaining 4 open positions, like include offer to 2 more males and to 2 more females, there will actually be different levels of false positive rates for the 2 groups. So that's where equalized odds comes in, and this is the more like more restrictive definition. So it's where there is an equal true positive rate and false positive rate in both the 2 groups. And yeah, I have an example there. I won't go through the maths of it there, but you can pursue it at your own leisure. And these are just some of the fairness metrics that people have thought about. I think these are really interesting to me because what is clear is that in different situations, different might be appropriate, and it is still sort of, a human ethical decision as to which fairness like metric or goal you want to have for your data product. Yeah, so this is an example from Google's What If tool. And this is on the COMPASS data set, which I have completely blanked on the acronym, but it is a data set for basically the jail system or the prison system in the US. And this particular model is predicting whether there's recidivism within 2 years. So that is whether someone once released from prison will commit a crime within the next 2 years. So if true, it's predicted that they will commit another crime, and if false, they are predicted not to commit another crime within 2 years. And so what you can do, and you can do this yourself, is go to Google's What If tool and sort of look through this data set. They break it down by different sort of protected subgroups. And the example I have here is by the African American race. And what you can see, so feature value 1 is those of the African American race, and feature value 0 are all others. And you can see that this is sort of the standard, let's say, threshold value of 0.6. So if your algorithm outputs something above 0.6, it's to determine this individual will commit crime in the next 2 years. I think what you can see from this really clearly is that the false positive rate is much higher for those of African American race than those not. So it's almost 24%, whereas 7.4% among those not in that race. And you can also see an inequality in the false negative rate. So this means that almost a quarter of, if this threshold were used in this model to determine whether or not someone should be allowed out of the prison system or not, a quarter of those who would not be allowed out were in fact falsely sort of not allowed out of the jail system. And so that is, of course, a high cost. And you might consider like employing some sort of fairness metric to at least try and make this fairer. And what you can see, and again, you can play around with this yourself on Google's tool, is you can select here an fairness optimization strategy. And this one is selecting equal opportunity. So now you see the thresholds differ between the 2 groups. And you now see the false positive rate are almost equivalent. So remembering this equal of opportunity is equalizing the true positive rate, but we can see it, of course, impacts the false positive rate and the false negative rate, and they're much closer to each other. But you will see that overall the accuracy decreases, right? But this is something where, like, again, as a human, you decide, what am I optimizing for? Yeah, so that's the COMPASS data set. I also mentioned causal reasoning, and just a brief sort of revision of how you can think about causal reasoning. This is a causal graph. You can imagine y here as an outcome variable. And for me, y is usually fraud or not fraud, or has been. So that's the example I'll use here. You have some unobserved variable that has some causal impact. So all arrows here are causal. So this is not just correlation, it's something causing something else. So we could imagine U1 here being something like months unemployed. So being unemployed for a long time may cause you to commit fraud. And you could imagine this also in turn has a causal relationship with something like the Schufa credit score, which is a measurement of your credit worthiness here in Germany. And this may also in turn have a causal relationship with your choice of issuer, because some issuers may refuse to give you a bank account if you don't have a nice Schufa score. And Z, which you could think of issuer refusal history, so how often your transactions are refused by your bank when you make payments online, for example. And this is just as simple, and perhaps issuer refusals can cause someone to revert out of fraud out of frustration. So that's where this causal relationship comes in again. But you can imagine this is just a really simple example how complex these causal models get. And so it can be nice to start and think really like, okay, what are the causal models behind this thing I'm trying to predict? But you can see that it can get out of hand very quickly, but I still think it's good practice to sort of begin to think in that way whenever building any sort of predictive model, especially in a sensitive domain. And what this leads into is counterfactuals. And this is the only equation I have in these slides, I promise. But I think it does a better job at explaining than me. So like I mentioned, counterfactual fairness is when you have some predictor, y hat, and you have some factors, x, which are non-protected, and then you have some protected attributes. So again, these are things that are largely outside of the individual's control, that they are born with, that are sensitive. And a predictor is counterfactually fair if given all x and all protected attributes A. If you change that protected attribute A, the predicted y hat is still the same. And this is how we define counterfactual fairness. Again, lots of text, but this is an example of how you might begin to think about this. So a car insurance company wishes to price insurance for car owners by predicting their accident rate Y. So that's Y in this causal diagram here. They assume there is an unobserved factor corresponding to aggressive driving U. So this is U, which causes these accidents Y. It also happens to be that aggressive drivers prefer red cars, and that's X. It could also be true that individuals belonging to certain race A are more likely to drive red cars. So that's this A to X relationship here. What is important in this graph is there is no causal line from X to Y. So driving a red car does not make you more likely to have an accident. Nor does belonging to race A make you more likely to drive or to be in an accident. But this U, this sort of aggressive driving feature, is not available to the insurers, so they're not able to use that in the model. So they may be tempted to use this red car indicator feature here. And what you can see is that this is not counterfactually fair, because if you change A while holding this fixed, it will also change X, and then consequently your prediction of Y hat. So what do you do in this situation? What not to do is this criterion that some people apply, which is called this fairness through awareness, which is your model or your algorithm is fair if it uses no factors that are protected attributes. So a lot of people assume I'm building a model, I'm not including something like race or gender, therefore my model is fair. But in this instance, you can actually show that the regression of Y on X without A is counterfactually unfair, But if you regress y on x and a, it is in fact counterfactually fair. So yeah, I think it's a good check or a good sort of reminder that fairness through awareness does not necessarily mean that your algorithm is fair.
Maybe if I have a question, or more like a story that one of the speakers a few weeks ago shared with us was very similar to what you showed in the CV screening. So it was also there was a team who was trying to make sure that they are fair to both females and males, right? When they were selecting candidates. So what they did is they removed gender from their features, right? And they thought, okay, like if we do this, then our algorithm becomes fair. It's very similar to what you told us. So like they removed the words like women from the CV. And then what happened was because women, they spend time with kids, for example, like when the kids are growing up, they tend to have fewer years of experience. And this, I think, this is this may be an observed factor, right? Do they get to see with the kids or not? And that's why, even though they removed the gender variable, because they had this year of experience that was how to say, influenced by the other factor, right? By the gender factor, then still the algorithm was preferring males to females. Like, is it an example similar to what you're talking here?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. And it's a good example because that's really like a real thing that impacts real people. Yeah, exactly. And I think it's easy. And I think I've definitely been guilty of myself to assume, yeah, you leave out these features, you're not being biased, but actually, yes, it can creep in. Yeah, so the final sort of method I touched on, and by the way, of course, these methods are not exhaustive, and the first step is always like data collection, data preparation, framing the problem. But yeah, the fourth one is explainability. So this is from a paper, which I also link in the end, about using cohort Shapley values sort of to identify bias and measure it. And Shapley values are particularly suited to this because, of course, you can, so first of all, you don't even need to have the protected attribute as a feature in your original model to see with Shapley values how it impacts the results of your model. Additionally, with Shapley values, you can check the impact on the actual prediction, y hat. So that's this top graph here, but you can also sort of reframe it as what is the impact on the false positive rate and what is the impact on the false negative rate. And this screenshot is actually for that data set that we already saw with the what if tool. So the Compass recidivism data set. And yeah, I really found this paper super interesting. I would really recommend reading it. And I think, again, many reasons to sort of invest in explainability in your data products. And this is yet another one. Cool. So I in previous company and now at Spoke, I think it's nice to have reflections for like teams or individuals. And these are the ones that I find useful to ask within a team. So I think a question always is where or with who should the stewardship of data ethics lie? Of course, we've touched on just like algorithmic fairness, which is one tenet of data ethics. It's much broader than that, covers things like data privacy and transparency and many other things. But I think it's something I've seen that companies are beginning to get a handle on, but it's still sometimes an open question. How much is up to the individual? How much guidance can we expect from within the company, from someone knowledgeable about the topic? How do we have conversations and discussions around it within teams? I think it's very interesting to figure out. I also think always, is the question of algorithmic fairness relevant to the data product we were building? So data products can be many different things. I think, for example, in financial crime, it's super relevant because it is something that is very sensitive and it really impacts people's lives. So if you are unfairly blocking transactions from a protected subgroup every day, that has a real impact on their life. And so it's definitely relevant, but it mightn't be relevant for all data products. I think, yeah, just the question, what do we currently do within teams, companies, or individuals to ensure data handling and model development adhere to our own ethical standards? I think for myself personally, like a long time, I just, I have my own ethics or my own belief, and then I have my work, and I try to do that. And I never really thought about, okay, am I living out my own ethical beliefs in practicing them in the work I do? And I think, with that, well, almost everyone I have ever worked with has, their own set of really great ethical standards. And I think it's a nice, just bringing those into your work, and how you do that is the next question. Also think outstanding question for me is, how does algorithmic fairness within the company or the industry look in the future? Like, how can we have sort of forums for discussing these topics? I think they will get more complex over time and not less. I think it's really important. I think there are some signs that certain governmental organizations are beginning to take these things more seriously and think about them. But at least in my experience, regulation is always a little bit behind in these things. And I think we should start talking and thinking about these topics now, or before. And people are, of course, and more. But I'm wondering what the right forums should be for that, and the right way of doing it. So just a little bit on what I'm doing next, and why this topic is still really important to me, aside from what I said. So I'm working at Spoke. So we're building a tool to make sharing information in the workplace easier. And I think what is quite interesting problem there is some of what we'll do is automation, and some of what we'll do is augmenting using NLP models. So it's of course a question like, how much control should humans still have? I think that is an interesting ethical question for us, but also because we're using large language models, yes, definitely algorithmic fairness and bias is something we're concerned about. So yeah, if anybody has ideas or wants to discuss or has experience with working or thinking about data ethics and large language models, we'd love to hear from you. Yeah, and I have a bunch of links. I tried to cut them down to a few, but I liked them all, so I couldn't. I really would recommend the data responsibility comic. It's really great. Yeah, I put section fun, but maybe not everybody's fun. Also really there's a great podcast from Ezra Klein at the New York Times on the alignment problem. I highly recommend that. It sort of made me rethink how I approach data problems. And yeah, good article on potty training. If you're curious about the right way to do it. No. And then a link to all the tools I mentioned, and then some papers. I also think it's super interesting, the European Commission's white paper on artificial intelligence came out in 2020. Like I said, they're beginning to really think about these things. What is clear from that is that, yeah, algorithmic fairness is going to be part of that. And also they're really hoping to not just use or apply it in Europe, but use Europe as a platform to sort of spread these ideas of data ethics across the globe. Yeah. So yeah, I guess I'm finishing a little early, but thank you for your time. Of course, I'm open to any questions. Always feel free to reach out on LinkedIn also if you want to follow up on stuff. But yeah. I'll pass it back to you, Alexei.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you because you said if somebody wants to talk about fairness in language models, and you said they should reach out to you. So the best way of doing this would be through LinkedIn, right?
Yeah, you can also email me. It's just my first name, Gráinne at spoke.ai. But yeah, either way.
Without the accent, right?
Without the accent, yeah.
I'm wondering if it will work if somebody writes to you with the accent.
I think it does, because at least it works with my other email address. So
Okay. Yeah, actually, somebody remember the quote you showed at the beginning.
Oh yes, I
So
forgot.
Sura said that it's Elon Musk. Is it correct?
It is indeed Elon Musk. Yeah.
Do you know what was the context why he was saying that?
I believe, I mean, I'm not sure if it was exactly from the infamous Joe Rogan podcast where he had his own rants, but I believe in general he has talked a lot about how he believes governments are actually quite slow in this idea of AI sort of regulation, and he's been lobbying, I believe, for governments to sort of get their motor track on when it comes to these things. Yeah, so I think it was just discussing that topic.
So like he was trying to bring it up like to get attention to the problem that, hey, you need to pay attention to this thing, else it will just run over us. Like was it Anthill or
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't remember.
Over
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, like you were talking about different biases and ways of introducing bias, and then one of them was data collection bias,
Yeah.
and the illustration there was translation from Hungarian to English. I saw this. It was showing up like I saw it in Twitter. Like quite a few people shared this thing like a couple of weeks ago. It went quite viral. But when I saw this, I was thinking, like, what is the right way of actually approaching this? I don't want to ask you because this is a tricky question, right? So maybe you don't know the answer. But should it be just always say the same pronoun, or should they ask the person, the human, hey, what should be the correct pronoun here? Like it's tricky, right? Because there is no gender there in Hungarian. But now they have to translate it to English, and what is the right way of doing this? It's really an open question.
Yeah, to me, it's also definitely an open question. I'm glad I don't have to decide the answer. But I think it's like, for me, it's just whatever is decided, like being deliberate and conscious about it, you know, and it being clear. So, for example, if my, I don't know, younger brother goes to translate something in Hungarian, and he sees this, understanding that it's an artifact of the model rather than actually, what it truly translated as. I think having that context is the first thing I would like to do.
Yeah, like if somebody uses this to actually translate things, right? So then they should always take the translation with a grain of salt and correct it for the actual problem or whatever they have at hand, right?
Yeah.
Okay, clear. And other thing I wanted to ask you. By the way, yeah, it's quite interesting. So the advertising to men is actually cheaper than to women.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like even though they try to have it balanced, but the actual platform that they used for reaching out to people for showing the ads had this bias. That's interesting.
Yeah. Apparently it's because women drive, I think, 70 or 80% of consumer purchases online. So yeah, we're more expensive to advertise to, which I didn't know either. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, so I guess if you show some e-commerce things, right? Like if you want to show, I don't know, some item from Amazon, then okay. So and for advertisers, there is no way to distinguish between, hey, are you showing a job listing or an item from, let's say, Amazon, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, because I guess at the same time, so let's say a person visits a website and then there is a bidding, and then there is somebody from Amazon bidding on this person and somebody from, I don't know, a job portal. And then, yeah, Amazon just pays more. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I just and the example you gave is also like about the brother who was taking advantage of his younger sibling. That's very similar, right? To this. Yeah, but what I wanted to ask you is, I don't think I quite got this counterfactual fairness. Yeah, maybe if you can explain it one more time. So with the example of, was it with the credit score, right? So what does it tell us, this counterfactual fairness? Like, how do we use it for that example?
Yeah, so I think, so yeah, to take an example of a credit score, imagine I and let's say my male partner who have the exact same financial history, income, every sort of attribute one can imagine, we should receive the same sort of credit limit. Even like, yes, so basically it's that idea. In the case of the car, I gave, what is tricky about counterfactual fairness is that it's not just, of course, like in the example I just gave, it can be just the case that you change a protected attribute and nothing else changes, right? But imagine in the credit score example, I'm trying to think of something like number of letters in your name. For whatever reason, they have used this in the credit score model because they've seen it's predictive and it's capturing something. And if you change like the gender from male to female, you might expect the average name length to also shift, from 5 to 7 or something. And counterfactually fair would imply that if that sort of name length thing has a causal relationship with gender, but gender itself has no relationship with creditworthiness, then you would expect that by changing gender, you still would receive the same credit limit, even though your name length would change.
Okay. Yeah, I guess the example I mentioned about the CV screening, and even though they removed the gender variable, and gender variable in this case was, I don't know if it's the right word to say correlated, but it affects the years of experience variable, right? Because let's say you just gave an example, like you take a female and male, and with the same parameters, with the same features, sorry, they should get the same kind of credit, right? But if you use this years of experience feature in like when making a decision how much credit to give, then maybe like females will receive less. And counterfactually fair model, like when you change gender, it will also change the years of experience variable, right? And then even though for a female, it's a couple of years less, perhaps, because the female spent time with the kid, they should still receive the same amount of credit, right?
Yes, if you've controlled for sort of the real causal impact of years of experience, right? Because of course, one could hypothesize that there is a real causal relationship between years of experience and job performance. So it's like, once that's controlled for, then yes, they should be the same.
Okay, it's tricky.
Yeah, it is tricky. Yeah.
Yeah, so there is a question from Yasin. Just a moment, sorry, my kid is here.
Yeah. Okay, no worries.
He wants attention. And he needs a toy. So now he will get his. So, like in the meantime, there's a question from Yasin: is what is your advice for beginners?
I think like my advice for beginners, I get on the topic of algorithmic fairness would be really to start with the slide I showed of the 4 examples where data can go through your problem that way. So really write down what is the problem I'm trying to solve, make sure it's aligned with the goal, whatever way you're trying to solve it. And then really pay attention to your data, like consider, where's my data coming from? Is it reflective of reality? Does it reflect existing prejudices? I think those are the 2 most important things you can do. And then I think, determining fairness measures and metrics, that's something later down the line to look into.
Okay. Yeah, I would ask a follow-up, but I have hard time paying attention to what you're saying. Sorry.
Okay.
Okay, now the distraction is gone. And then another question is if you have any advice for working with data and learning simulators. I don't know if you know what is this. I guess does it tell you anything? Data and learning simulators?
I'm not sure, no, what that means. But...
Yeah, maybe Yasin, you can clarify a bit, because I also don't know. I remember when I was studying at university, we had a course called modeling, and then we were creating different like simulation, like environments. Let's say we were modeling a line in a supermarket, and then we were like how often people show up in a supermarket, and then how long the queue becomes after that, or like we also were modeling like fuel. How do you call this thing where you go to like refill your tank for a car? I don't know what's the right word in English.
You review your which?
Like let's say you have a car and then you run out of petrol, and then you go to this place where you refill it.
Like a petrol station.
Yeah, exactly. That's the word I was looking for. So we were modeling these things. So maybe this is a question about that. But yeah, Yasin is not answering. Yeah, I guess I don't have any. Let me just check if there are any other questions. So no, there are no questions. Yeah, then I guess I would like to thank you for joining us today, for sharing this, for bringing this up to our attention, because yeah, many things for me were quite new. Like especially, I had no idea about this that men are cheaper to advertise to. But then the big question is, how do we deal with this? And then there are quite a lot of open questions there. Yeah.
Yeah, and like, thank you for your time. And like I said, any follow-up questions, people, please reach out. Anyone who likes to discuss these topics, I definitely like to talk. So I'm happy to talk more about it.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks everyone for asking questions, for watching us, and have a great rest of your day.
Yeah. Okay.